The wind howls across a frozen plain. A towering figure steps forward, broad-shouldered, nearly 2 meters tall, muscles hardened by endless struggle. In his hand, a spear carved from mammoth bone. Behind him, a herd of bison stampedes toward a cliff, driven by his people's strategy. He looks almost like us, but not quite. If you crossed paths with him, you might mistake him for a modern athlete, until you realized he lived 40,000 years ago. Who were these Ice Age giants, the Cro-Magnons, and how did they not only survive, but rise to dominate one of the harshest chapters in human history? 40,000 years ago, the Earth was a place most of us wouldn't survive a single week in. Picture endless fields of ice stretching to the horizon, glaciers carving valleys like knives through the land, and winters so brutal they could freeze rivers solid for months. This was the stage on which Cro-Magnons appeared, the first humans who looked almost exactly like us. The Ice Age wasn't just cold. It was deadly. Woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and cave bears ruled the landscape. Food was scarce, and every hunt was a gamble between life and death. But into this harsh arena stepped a new kind of human, tall, muscular, and resilient. These were the Cro-Magnons, people who didn't just survive in this frozen wasteland, but thrived in it. Scientists believe Cro-Magnons first arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago, migrating from Africa during one of the planet's most punishing climates. To put that into perspective, they weren't stumbling onto a fertile paradise. They were walking straight into a battlefield of nature, where the environment itself was the enemy. And yet they flourished. Their bones tell a story of towering height compared to other humans of the time. Men often stood 6 feet tall or more, with thick, powerful builds that made them natural hunters. Their skulls show large brains, even slightly bigger than ours today, hinting at intelligence that could match or surpass modern humans. It was this combination, strength, resilience, and sharp minds, that allowed them to push forward into a Europe already occupied by another formidable species, the Neanderthals. But who were these Cro-Magnons really? And why, when we look in the mirror today, do we see so much of them staring back? The story of Cro-Magnons didn't begin with their lives. It began with their graves. In 1868, near a small village in southern France called Les Aziz, workers stumbled upon a limestone shelter while digging for a railway project. Inside, they uncovered something extraordinary: skeletons. Not the hunched, heavy-browed skulls of Neanderthals that scientists already knew about, but tall, graceful forms with faces almost identical to ours. The bones looked surprisingly modern. The jaws were smaller, the foreheads higher, and the skulls rounder, features we would recognize in the mirror today. Yet the burial site was ancient, dating back tens of thousands of years. These remains came to be known as the Cro-Magnon people, named after the very rock shelter where they were first found. At first, scientists were baffled. Were these a lost branch of humanity, a strange cousin species, or were they simply us? For decades, debates raged. Some believed Cro-Magnons were a completely separate type of human, distinct from both Neanderthals and modern Homo sapiens. Others argued they were simply early Europeans, our direct ancestors frozen in time by the Ice Age. Over time, evidence began to tilt toward one conclusion: Cro-Magnons weren't outsiders at all. They were fully Homo sapiens just like us, but living in a world we can barely imagine. Their tools, their bones, and eventually their art confirmed it. The Cro-Magnons were the first true Europeans, pioneers who carved out a life on the edge of survival. But while they may have looked like us, they weren't carbon copies. Their bodies carried the marks of their brutal environment. To understand who they really were, we need to step closer, to examine the physical giants that Ice Age Europe produced. If you met a Cro-Magnon face-to-face, you might mistake him for a modern athlete. The average Cro-Magnon male stood close to 6 feet tall, towering over the shorter, stockier Neanderthals who shared Europe with them. Their skeletons show broad shoulders, thick bones, and muscles that must have bulged with every movement. These were people built for power. Why were they so big? Part of the answer lies in adaptation. Life during the Ice Age demanded bodies that could endure relentless cold, endless walking across frozen plains, and the brutal force required to bring down a mammoth or bison. A Cro-Magnon's frame wasn't just large, it was efficient. Their strong limbs could hurl heavy spears, drag carcasses for miles, and fight predators hand to claw if necessary. Their skulls tell another story. With brain sizes averaging slightly larger than ours today, sometimes reaching 1,600 cubic centimeters compared to our 1,400, they carried a mental edge to match their physical strength. This intelligence allowed them to craft better tools, strategize in hunts, and organize communities that could survive together. But this strength came at a cost. Cro-Magnon bones reveal a life of injuries: broken arms, fractured ribs, smashed skulls, signs of violent encounters with both wild beasts and rival humans. Their bodies were weapons, but also targets, and survival often meant living with scars. Still, it's easy to see why Cro-Magnons became the dominant humans of Ice Age Europe. They were tall, powerful, clever, and relentless. Against a backdrop of freezing winds and prowling predators, they embodied resilience. And yet, for all their strength, they weren't the only humans on the continent. Standing across the firelight from them were the Neanderthals, rivals, neighbors, and sometimes partners. For Cro-Magnons, survival wasn't a quiet existence. It was a daily battle with beasts that dwarfed them in size and ferocity. Imagine standing on an icy plain, spear in hand, while a woolly mammoth thunders past, each footfall shaking the ground. To take down such a giant required not just courage, but extraordinary teamwork and strategy. Cro-Magnons perfected the art of the hunt. Unlike solitary predators, they worked together in carefully planned drives. Sometimes entire groups of hunters would coordinate to funnel animals toward cliffs, traps, or narrow passes. One wrong move could mean death, but when it worked, the payoff was enormous. Enough meat, bone, and hide to sustain the group for weeks. Their weapons reveal their genius. Archaeologists have found finely crafted stone blades, spear points hardened by fire, and even evidence of spear throwers, tools that extended their reach and delivered deadly force from a distance. Compared to the heavier, less refined weapons of the Neanderthals, Cro-Magnon technology gave them a distinct advantage. But hunting wasn't only about mammoths. Cro-Magnons pursued bison, reindeer, horses, and even smaller game like rabbits and fish. This flexibility in diet meant they could survive in environments that would starve more specialized hunters. They were opportunists willing to eat what the land offered, whether that meant roasted meat, ground seeds, or gathered berries. Yet every hunt was a gamble. Bones tell us of hunters gored by bison horns, mauled by cave lions, or crushed beneath stampeding herds. Survival demanded not only skill, but bravery bordering on recklessness. And still, they kept hunting, because in the Ice Age, not hunting meant certain death. Cro-Magnons were masters of strategy, weapons, and endurance. But as we'll see, the dangers didn't only come from the animals they chased. Sometimes the greatest threats came from within their own kind. When we think of prehistoric humans, it's easy to imagine them united against the cold, the predators, and the endless hunger. But Cro-Magnon bones tell a harsher truth. Sometimes their greatest enemies were each other. Archaeologists studying Cro-Magnon skeletons have uncovered chilling evidence. Skulls split by blunt force, ribs shattered by spears, arrowheads lodged deep in bone. These aren't the marks of accidents in the hunt. They're signs of violence, human against human. Life in small bands meant competition was fierce. For food, for shelter, and for dominance. Disputes could easily explode into deadly confrontations. Some sites even suggest darker rituals of survival. In a handful of cases, bones of Cro-Magnons bear cut marks, signs that flesh was deliberately removed. Was this cannibalism? Possibly. Whether driven by starvation during brutal winters, or by ritual practices we can only guess at, it reveals just how far humans would go when survival hung by a thread. But violence wasn't always the end of the story. Remarkably, many Cro-Magnon skeletons show signs of healing. Broken bones mended, skull fractures fused, infections survived. This means their communities didn't simply abandon the injured. They cared for one another, proving that even amid brutality, compassion played a role in survival. This duality, fierce violence and deep care, paints Cro-Magnons as fully human. They weren't just hunters or warriors. They were complex people capable of cruelty, loyalty, and everything in between. Still, one question lingers. What happened when Cro-Magnons crossed paths with another kind of human, the Neanderthals? Were they enemies, allies, or something far more complicated? When Cro-Magnons first stepped into Ice Age Europe, they weren't alone. Neanderthals had ruled this land for hundreds of thousands of years, perfectly adapted to the cold, with their stocky builds and powerful muscles. For a time, the two species lived side by side, sharing the same hunting grounds, caves, and resources. But coexistence was never simple. Evidence suggests that encounters between Cro-Magnons and Neanderthals often turned violent. Archaeological sites show layers of sudden destruction, camps abandoned, skeletons with wounds likely caused by human weapons. Competition for game and territory could easily have sparked deadly clashes. Imagine two groups meeting on a frozen plain, both armed, both desperate, both unwilling to back down. And yet, the story doesn't end with bloodshed. DNA tells us a different side of the encounter. Modern humans today, especially those of European and Asian descent, carry small percentages of Neanderthal DNA. This means Cro-Magnons and Neanderthals didn't only fight. They also mingled, interbred, and raised families together. The lines between us and them weren't as clear as we once believed. So were they enemies, friends, or reluctant partners? The truth may be that they were all three. Some meetings ended in violence, others in bonds that carried forward into our very genomes. But over time, Cro-Magnons became the dominant group. Neanderthals slowly disappeared, vanishing around 40,000 years ago, leaving Cro-Magnons to inherit Europe. It wasn't just superior weapons or strategies that gave Cro-Magnons the edge. It was adaptability, cooperation, and sheer resilience. They could thrive in environments where Neanderthals struggled. And they passed on their legacy not through extinction alone, but through union. With rivals gone and survival secured, Cro-Magnons had the freedom to create something remarkable. Culture, art, and ideas that went far beyond the hunt. Once Cro-Magnons secured their place as Europe's dominant humans, something extraordinary happened. Survival was still a daily challenge, but they began to look beyond it. They weren't just hunters anymore. They were builders, traders, and thinkers shaping the first sparks of what we'd recognize as human culture. Archaeological sites reveal that Cro-Magnons built more than temporary shelters. They constructed sturdy dwellings out of mammoth bones, tusks, and hides, reinforced with stone and wood. These were not crude tents. Some were carefully arranged structures, showing planning and an understanding of space. Inside, hearths burned bright, not only for warmth and cooking, but as the center of family and social life. Trade, too, connected their scattered groups. Beads carved from ivory in one region have been found hundreds of miles away, suggesting networks that stretched across Ice Age Europe. These weren't isolated bands struggling alone. They were part of a web of exchange, sharing materials, ideas, and perhaps even stories. For the first time, humanity was knitting together into something larger than a single tribe, and within their groups, Cro-Magnons showed remarkable social bonds. Injured members were cared for, elders were respected, and burial practices suggest a sense of belonging that extended beyond life itself. They weren't just surviving as individuals, they were thriving as communities. This social fabric gave them an advantage no other species could match. In the dead of winter, when food was scarce and danger loomed, cooperation and connection meant the difference between life and death. But Cro-Magnons didn't stop at building shelters or trading beads. They expressed themselves in ways that went far beyond survival, ways that spoke to imagination, belief, and even beauty. That story unfolds in their art. Step into the darkness of a cave lit only by flickering firelight. On the walls, animals come alive. Bison charging, horses galloping, mammoths towering. These are not random scratches. They are deliberate, detailed, and breathtaking. Cro-Magnons were the first true artists, leaving behind paintings and carvings that still inspire awe, tens of thousands of years later. The famous caves of Lascaux and Chauvet in France reveal their mastery. Using natural pigments, they painted with perspective, shading, and even motion. Some images seem to shimmer in the light of a torch, almost as if the animals themselves were moving. Why did they do it? Perhaps to honor the hunt, to teach younger generations, or as part of spiritual rituals we may never fully understand. Their creativity wasn't limited to walls. Small carvings known as Venus figurines appear across Europe, tiny sculptures of exaggerated female forms, often with wide hips and large breasts. Were they fertility symbols, representations of mothers, or early expressions of beauty? No one knows for certain, but they reveal a culture deeply engaged with symbolism and meaning. And then there was music. Archaeologists have uncovered flutes carved from bird bones and mammoth ivory, some more than 40,000 years old. Imagine a Cro-Magnon sitting by the fire, the haunting sound of a flute drifting into the night, carrying notes that echoed across the frozen plains. These were people not just surviving, but creating, seeking connection, expression, and perhaps even transcendence. Through art, music, and ritual, Cro-Magnons revealed a truth. They weren't simply enduring the Ice Age. They were imagining, believing and feeling, much like we do today. And it was this inner life that made them not just survivors of their age, but visionaries of humanity's future. For thousands of years, Cro-Magnons thrived as the giants of Ice Age Europe. They built homes from mammoth bones, created networks of trade, painted masterpieces on stone walls, and filled the air with music. In every way, they seemed unstoppable. And yet they did not remain a separate people forever. By around 10,000 years ago, the Ice Age began to thaw. Glaciers retreated, climates warmed, and with those changes came new challenges. The animals Cro-Magnons had hunted for generations, woolly mammoths, giant bison, cave lions, disappeared one by one. The very world that had shaped them was vanishing. But instead of fading away, Cro-Magnons adapted once again. They weren't replaced by others. They became us. Over time, Cro-Magnons blended seamlessly into the stream of modern humanity. Their DNA is still inside us today, carried quietly in every heartbeat, every thought, every breath. In fact, if you are of non-African descent, chances are you share not only Cro-Magnon genes, but traces of Neanderthal ancestry as well, a reminder of those ancient encounters long ago. Their legacy is more than genetic. Every painting, every carving, every tool they left behind whispers of the moment humanity truly began to dream. Cro-Magnons proved that humans could do more than endure nature's cruelty. We could shape meaning, beauty, and culture in its midst. So when we look at their art, or listen to the sound of a reconstructed Ice Age flute, we aren't just hearing the echoes of a vanished people. We're hearing the first chords of our own story. Cro-Magnons didn't disappear. They live on in us, our hands, our minds, and our imagination. The story of the Cro-Magnons isn't just ancient history, it's a mirror. When we look back at them, we don't see a lost species of strangers. We see ourselves, tall, resilient, endlessly creative, and capable of both violence and compassion. They were hunters and warriors, but also artists and dreamers. They survived in one of the harshest environments Earth has ever known, and in doing so, they lit the first sparks of what it means to be human. Think about it. Without Cro-Magnons, there might never have been cave paintings that still move us after 40,000 years. No haunting music carried through the Ice Age night. No social networks that stretched across frozen Europe. These weren't just survival tactics. They were the beginnings of culture, of community, of humanity as we understand it today. And here's the most powerful truth. Cro-Magnons never really vanished. They became us. Their blood still runs in our veins. Their dreams echo in our imaginations, and their resilience lives in the way we continue to face challenges, adapt, and push forward. In a way, we are their final masterpiece. So next time you see a piece of art, hear music, or simply gather around a fire with friends and family, remember, you are carrying on traditions older than civilization itself. You are continuing a story that began in the frozen caves of Europe, told by people who refused to let the cold, the dark, or even extinction stop them. If this journey into the world of Cro-Magnons made you think, imagine, or even feel a connection to those Ice Age giants, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe, join our community, and let's keep exploring the stories that shaped us. Because history isn't just about the past, it's about who we are and who we're still becoming.